Released in 1990 by Taito for arcade, Space Gun is one of those light gun on the rail shooters that is likely as fondly remembered from that era, with other games such as Terminator 2 the arcade game, and even older titles such as Operation Wolf. Of course, the whole concept, or rather the whole theme, is very similar to a particular franchise known as Alien. An official light gun shooter for Alien 3 actually released in 1993, although sadly that version never received any home conversions and remained as an arcade exclusive, but you must try Alien 3 the gun if you haven't already. It's one of the best of its kind. So, going back to Space Gun, I vaguely remember this in the arcade but never actually played it at the time. My 10 and 20 pence coins were being thrown into the Turtles arcades game at the time. The cabinet for the arcade's release had two light guns mounted and plastic moulded decals which also hung over the player, which resembles an alien cocoon with an almost H.R. Geiger look to it. I promise you though, Taito had absolutely no intention of copying a particular Sigourney Weaver franchise. The aim of Space Gun then is to rescue hostages located on a space station which has frankly seen better days. There is a time limit to reach the end of each stage, and towards the end of the game, this can get surprisingly punishing. We get to shoot off limbs of aliens and have blood splatter against the screen as we play. We also have mechanical security guns to destroy. We have a standard pulse rifle, rapid fire weapon, as well as a few other weapons that we can shoot at in the game in order to get them, such as the flamethrower, grenade launcher, and the blade bomb. We also collect ammunition throughout the game, so pretty much a clone of Operation Wolf and so forth, only set in space. The game is powered by Taito's very own Taito Z system, the hardware which also powered classics such as Chase HQ and also Continental Circus. So today we are checking out every official release of the 1990 Taito arcade game, which is of course Space Gun, and as always ranking from worst to best of each home conversion. And remember one last thing, in space nobody can hear you scream. I was convinced that the Commodore 64 had a fairly good version of Space Gun, but was it really that good? I'll be honest, it feels flat and doesn't feel very substantial when shooting down enemies or aliens. I think this is partly because aliens don't fall apart when shooting them with this Ocean 1992 release. The coder has chosen to make aliens explode, and they do seem to take some shooting down to make this happen here too. It seems that the weapons doesn't take long to overheat here either, and we obviously need to wait before it cools down to allow us to shoot again effectively. As you will see, the scroll is fine, it doesn't suffer any major frame drops as such, and the pseudo 3D element of the game isn't too bad here either. In fact, the backdrops are fairly nicely implemented. It's the actual sprites here that really make this game look ugly. The music production is of course top notch, but as a game itself it personally doesn't do much for me with this Commodore 64 release. Again, just like the next version in this video, this was one of the last releases for the C64 by Ocean Software, and it was released on cartridge only as part of their C64 cartridge range. Commodore Force magazine actually rated this with a 76% in issue 6 back in 1993, as Commodore Format magazine issue number 17 rated this one at 86% in 1992. You can look at the ZX Spectrum version by Ocean, which released in 1992 also, and think this looks terrible, but let's hand it to the coder behind this version who actually attempted this game on a mere 128k ZX Spectrum in the first place. For what it is and the hardware it is running on, Space Gun for the ZX Spectrum isn't as bad as you might think. It is of course a fairly later release for the Spectrum. Most kids at this point have obviously moved on to the 16-bit console generation with the Super Nintendo or Sega Mega Drive, and they were enjoying speedy hedgehogs or plumbers eating mushrooms. As for this game then, just check out the pseudo 3D effect as we move through the corridors of the space station. To pull off a 3D effect on this hardware, especially very impressive, and it also looks very good too. So aliens do overcrowd the gameplay screen, and this can happen a fair amount where it can be difficult to see hostages which are hiding behind them. More often than not that happens. I ended up killing them by accident. This game does slow down a fair amount, but it controls so well. The coder has even gone to the effort of making the aliens' limbs tear off when you are shooting at them. The layout of the gameplay is very faithful to the original arcade game, and the opening presentation to the game, which gives you the storyline, is all really well nicely done here too. This Ocean release looks and feels much like a premium game than some of the other Spectrum releases that Ocean did over the years. In Crash Magazine issue 96, the game was rated at 92% and awarded it with a Crash Smash. Your Sinclair issue 89 in 1993 rated it with 87% for its Hit Squad re-release. The Sega Master System's release of Space Gun was designed for the light phaser gun and was actually released by Sega themselves. You know, for an 8-bit console, this version is actually very good. Yes, it is a cut-back version in terms of visuals, and walking through doors which normally stays in gameplay fades out and then fades in here to enter new rooms. The Master System obviously wasn't powerful enough to stay consistent with this. But those fade-ins and fade-outs actually doesn't look that bad or out of place here. It kind of works well with the theme, that horror theme that is of the game. The tiles, or as many will call them sprites, are scaled down a lot here. Sure, it's not much like how it should look, but the developer knew the limitations clearly, and for smaller aliens rather than oversized, it looks better, unlike the C64's version where they clearly went overboard and ended up producing a pixelated mess in terms of the enemy sprites. The music is really nice here too. It's surprising if the Master System was left in the right hands, some very good music could be produced with it. This game is running from a stock Master System and there is no FM sound unit attached, so the music here is very impressive. Sound effects here are typical 8-bit Master System style. It also scrolls nice and fairly smooth too. There is some slight frame drops occasionally, but nothing major. This version has been criticised on release, and even to date with some saying the graphics are ugly, but in the context of this video I would disagree with some of these statements. If there was a criticism to make, I would say the lack of aliens limbs falling off and maybe a slight too easy. But having said that, I was using a mouse for this review, and a light phaser might have been slightly more challenging to play the game with. At the end of the day, this is an 8-bit system, and so creating mind-blowing visuals to match a vastly superior arcade game is going to be a challenge even for 16-bit systems. Talking about 16-bit systems, the Atari ST also had its Ocean release in 1992. Of course, an upgrade in terms of visuals compared to the Sega Master System's conversion, especially its handling towards larger scale sprites with higher definition added. This is one of the very few Atari ST games that supported the Trojan phaser light gun, although this is being played with a mouse here, which also works fairly well. Although the presentation and the visuals are fairly nice here, this release does tend to drop in frame rates. And make no doubt about it, this is one tough version of Space Gun, possibly even more challenging than the arcade game itself. Now, cargo boxes are fully destructible here, and we even have some voice samples for when aliens attack you, which doesn't sound too bad. Now, loading times once entering doors are a little wearing on patience, but that was inevitable for games that came on cassettes, or in this case floppy disks. The scrolling here of walking down corridors whilst keeping that pseudo 3D effect isn't too bad here, but really it's when several aliens and hostages all appear on screen at once. This is where this version's ultimate failure becomes apparent. It's not the developers behind this game as such, it's just that Atari ST games are often known to drop in frames significantly when too much was happening on the screen in one go. Let's remember that the ST had no hardware scrolling or hardware sprites, and so frame frame drops in most games, especially more complex games like this one, would be of course inevitable. Is it a good game? Well, sure, just like any Space Gun release, there is pros and cons attached. This release appears to be acceptable apart from those frame drops. In terms of gameplay, it does its best to remain faithful to the source material. The Commodore Amiga's 1992 Ocean release isn't a bad version of Space Gun. In terms of visuals, it does its best to replicate the source material with a similar colour scheme used here. I must say though that despite its faithfulness, its loading times are fairly atrocious. Whenever we walk through doors, off starts the floppy disk spinning for around 60 seconds. We actually got the sound of the iconic motion tracker here too, which sounds pretty good. It scrolls fairly well, although there is some frame drops when the screen becomes overcrowded. Something I liked about this version is that shooting down aliens not only made limbs fall off, but also had a similar feel to the arcade game. Kind of like we are actually achieving something special here when shooting down the aliens and watching them fall apart. Weapon upgrades such as flamethrowers work very well, and hit collision detection isn't badly done either. I would say though that the crosshair is a little on the smaller side here, but when shooting the pulse rifle, those bullets flying across the screen does its best to look like the 1990 arcade game. Is this a perfect home conversion? Well, of course not. Games like Space Gun was always going to be a challenge in porting over to home computers for many reasons, in that in many respects these computers weren't really up for the task. It's kind of like trying to replicate an Audi TT using parts from a Robin Reliant. But for what these home conversions were working from at the time, the Commodore Amiga's version of Space Gun isn't that bad. And my only real issue with it is the loading times. Amiga Power Up magazine reviewed this in 1992 with issue number 12 and actually gave it a 69%, but this was largely based on comparing it with other light gun shooters at the time. CU Amiga magazine, however, rated it with an 84% in January of 1992, praising its graphics and sound also. I will note here that Space Gun for the Amiga was one of the very few games for the Commodore Amiga that actually allowed light gun support. And that's it for ranking the various different home conversions of Space Gun today. You might not necessarily agree with my ranking order here, and like I say, I truly think it's just down to preference, and this is my personal opinion. Did you play this in the arcade at the time? What did you think of it? And which version did you have to play at home? Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.